Awesome. I think we can get started, and then as folks join, we can kick off here. My name is Megan Kosnowski. I'm the current president of WeSee's NY Metro. I'm joined here by my colleague Viola, who's also on the WeSee's New York board. If you're not familiar with us, we put on events probably once a quarter or so, a range of technical trainings, presentations, and networking events, both in the New York area and virtually. If you're interested in joining us, you can find out about our events by either going to any of our social media pages where WeSee's NY Metro. We have a LinkedIn page, we have a Twitter, we have an Instagram, and we also have a website, weseesnymetro.org. And from there, you can sign up for our email list. And we swear we won't spam you or share your email list with anyone. We really only send out information either about our events or about other affiliates within the WeSee's global organization who are putting on events that we think will be valuable to our membership. If you're interested in getting more involved, please feel free to reach out to myself or to Viola, or to reach out via any of our social media platforms or via our email list. We're always happy to get involved and would love more folks to help us both put on events with great panelists like Ro here, or folks who are just looking for new opportunities or things like that. One of the things that we're really passionate about is obviously increasing the percentage of underrepresented minorities in cybersecurity. And so we're happy to help connect sort of job seekers to job opportunities and things like that as well. So if you fall into one of those categories, you're looking to hire or you're looking for a job, feel free to reach out, and we're always happy to do what we can to support folks. Now, how this is going to work today is I'll kick it off to Ro, who's going to give our presentation, and then given the webinar format, we're going to ask that when you have questions, you drop them in the chat. When Ro's completed her presentation, I'll pop back in to sort of help moderate those questions and give Ro a chance to talk about all the great work that she's done here. And with that, Ro, who is the lead cyber risk consultant at Northwestern Mutual, has done some really incredible work on the security awareness front over the last year, and has a career of more than 10 years spanning various jobs in information security. She's brilliant. We're really excited to have her. So with that, thank you so much, Ro, and I'll kick it off to you.
Thanks, Megan. I really appreciate that very kind introduction, and thank you to the WeSee's community for having me. This is a wonderful opportunity to share something that I'm so passionate about. I'm going to just share my screen here. So let me know when everyone sees this. Okay. I'm assuming everyone can see this.
Yes, it looks great.
Okay, perfect. Thanks. All right. So, like Megan said, my name is Ro. I'm with Northwestern Mutual, and what my role, even though the title is the lead cyber risk management consultant, it really is just I function as the team lead for our security education and training team. So, what I'm here today to talk about is how you can build and grow a really effective security education, awareness, and training team based on not just the standard sort of security education and training processes, but also by actually leveraging real life cyber threat intel and pulling from marketing methodologies, which is not something people typically think of when they're thinking of cybersecurity. Is definitely not marketing. But I'll share a bit of that. And on a personal note, I want to share this one bit about why it's something that matters so much to me. So about 20 years ago, when I was in college, I had a family member who is very near and dear to me that was the victim of a phishing attack. And I was really closely involved with the entire process end to end, from the wire transfer and everything that happened as a result. And it was something that truly shaped much of how I see the world of cybersecurity and phishing. And at that time, I didn't even know that was an expression. But I share that because that happened, 2 decades ago. But phishing and security education awareness, I feel like, is more relevant today than it was even 20 years ago. And for me, it really is a very personal matter that I hope by the end of this talk, you can take some time to put yourself in the shoes of a person that has been part of a phishing attack, because that will probably heighten your sense of purpose in this field and hopefully help you understand a little bit more about the user and kind of why they partake in the behaviors that they do, even if it may be a bit risky. Okay, so now getting into some housekeeping here. The agenda for today, I want to just quickly go over these so you know what you're getting into with the talk. So phishing, why are we still talking about this, right? Like I gave you an example of something that happened 20 years ago. You might be wondering why does this still matter? We'll look at the evolution of the phishing threat landscape, and then we're also going to touch base on the emotions behind the clicks. I'll share with you some sample lures of successful campaigns that have hit organizations. And I'll touch base a little bit on email metrics and why they are important to share. We'll look at report suspicious email features that you can have your enterprise consider integrating if you're not already doing so, or ways that you can increase the usage of such a feature if you do have something. And we'll talk a little bit about that whole user experience and circling back with users who submit. I'll get into a little bit of the top threat actor technique of social engineering and what that looks like with us at Northwestern Mutual and what it might look like with you. We'll get into targeted leaders in a very specific group, and then the kind of targeted training that we here at Northwestern Mutual conduct. And of course, touching base on the branding and the marketing piece, I want to end off with a bit of that, and also uh, giving you insight into timelines that you can anticipate, because that's not something that I think most people are aware of when they're getting into this type of program and program planning. And I'll leave you with some tips and tricks, and then we'll touch base very briefly on the SANS framework and kind of looking ahead where we see ourselves at Northwestern Mutual. So phishing, vishing, smishing, oh my, there are a lot of different terminologies, right? And phishing, I mean, it is, I think everyone on the call is probably well aware, but it is the fraudulent practice of sending emails purporting to be from a trustworthy sender or a well-reputed sender, basically enticing users to click and reveal personal information such as credit card numbers, banking information, passwords, the whole nine. But what I want to touch base on is that, so that's phishing, that's very general, right? General attacks, but there's also vishing, which involves like voicemail calls, which you may have gotten something purporting to be from the IRS, smishing, which are the SMS, the texting attacks, but same sort of format. There's also social media phishing, where people use social media platforms. There's spear phishing, which is much more targeted based on your specific role at your company. There's whaling attacks, which are directly targeting the executives in the C-suite. So these are all variations, right, of different social engineering techniques. And for the purposes of this call, I will be referencing phishing throughout the call, but really what I'm referencing is that overall umbrella of the social engineering technique. So if you hear me say phishing, just know that I'm speaking quite generally. And in terms of why phishing still matters, so this statistic is from Expert Insights from 2021. Phishing accounts for 90% of all breaches that organizations face. And depending on the type of sector that you're in, so you could be in retail or financial services, as I am, that number may fluctuate a little bit. Okay, so in the financial services sector, for example, phishing has consistently been within the top 3 cyber threats, with things like insider threat and ransomware, in more recent years being kind of the top competitors. But depending on whatever space you're in, I can guarantee that phishing and this social engineering technique will always be in that top 3 bucket. So it still matters as much today as it did, 20, 30 years ago. And I would argue that it maybe even matters more because of the evolution of the threat landscape and the way that phishing lures have changed over time and just gotten more sophisticated. So speaking of that, I want to briefly get into, the past several years of different phishing lures that have hit over time. So in the 1990s, and some of you on the call may have even been born during this time, but there were these Nigerian prince scams that came along with that were chock full of spelling and grammatical issues. And if you were to show a sample of one of those lures to your users now, they probably would scoff and think, who would ever fall victim to this? But the fact is that really is, it speaks volumes to where we are now in comparison to where we were in the 1990s, because millions of dollars were lost using this very basic scam that would lure a user into thinking that, if I was a sender, that I was a Nigerian prince who needed your help and kind of implored you to send me a wire transfer, which just sounds unbelievable, but it was extremely effective. Come around early 2000, fraudsters started realizing that users were getting more sophisticated, and so they changed their lures a bit and had the subject line, I love you, because they realized that most users are responding based on what they're feeling inside, and they may have been curious about who this I love you was coming from. Eventually, those that transformed into teenagers realizing that they could very easily spoof websites and create opportunities to do credfish, so credential phishing and harvesting folks' credentials, just by standing up a very basic website that had the opportunity to enter one's username and password. Around 2010s is when we saw a huge rise and even maybe the beginning of social media phishing, which is, through Facebook or Instagram, Twitter, maybe even MySpace at that time, I'm not sure. But all of these different platforms that were being widely used were then leveraged by fraudsters to basically phish innocent users. And that is still very prevalent today. Around 2013 is when we saw, I think, the first major ransomware attack, which was the CryptoLocker attack that involved about 500,000 impacted computers, and the overall loss was closer to $3 million from that one campaign. And I share this with you because I want to really showcase how over time the evolution has changed, and it's constantly changing. So the types of lures that we're seeing today are very different from the types of lures that existed in the past, and they will constantly change. And I want to just briefly touch base on this analogy of the shark versus the mosquito, and bring it all home in the next slide. So most of us on this call probably would not choose to swim with sharks, right? It's a little bit terrifying to think that there could be a shark right here and you're right next to it, and so you might not choose to swim with a shark for fear of your life being in danger. On the flip side, if you had plans to go glamping or camping or something with your friends, you probably wouldn't cancel your plans for fear that you're going to die because of a mosquito bite, right? So if there's a mosquito right next to you, you're probably just going to carry on about your day and not think of it other than, just a basic nuisance. But if you were to actually look at the numbers over time, and this statistic comes from the Gates Foundation, over the past 100 years, sharks are responsible for the death of around 1,300 people. Okay, so the death toll over the course of 100 years, shark related, about 1,300. Meanwhile, mosquitoes in just 2016 alone, in 1 year, mosquito related deaths from mosquito bites were around 1,400. So in 1 year, mosquitoes trumped the death toll of sharks, by over 99 more years. I share this because oftentimes when folks think of cybersecurity, they really think about the big guns, which are the nation state sponsored threat actors or the hackers. And so a lot of infrastructure and budget and resources are allocated for the defense side that's very technical and involves security controls. And I think that that is extremely necessary because these threat actors can be quite deadly. However, when you think about the stat that I shared initially about the relevance of phishing attacks, which are directly related to our human defense layer, so users like you and I, We are very much like those mosquitoes. We are really deadly if you are to actually think of it in that grand scheme of things. So what I want to touch on is that human defense layer and kind of bringing it home and making people realize that we are as deadly in that regard as the mosquitoes, because we have one thing that you can't really factor into your security controls or embed in your algorithm, and that is human emotion. So I want to share with you the emotions behind the clicks, because most of us on this call are probably, if not already, cybersecurity professionals thinking of entering the space. And you might be wondering, why are people clicking again and again when they know better? And it's really because of these emotions. So the sense of fear usually results in a sense of urgency. And these two combined trump all of the other emotions that, like logic and reasoning, that you would typically feel when you're going through your inbox. And then a sense of greed or self-interest. If you see a lure that looks like it's going to benefit you in some way, you might want to engage. A sense of hope. So if you feel like you're able to give somebody else hope, or you feel like you're going to get hope by engaging with a lure, you might be inclined to engage. And then lastly, a sense of curiosity. So you might get an email that has a link to a picture of a cute dog. Maybe you're a dog person. I'm just putting that out there. And you might want to click on that because you're curious, well, what does this dog look like? And so while none of these emotions are typically ones that you should feel when handling work email, if it comes to your work device and you happen to open it up, your knee-jerk emotional reaction is not going to be one that's logically thinking. And so it becomes very imperative that we educate our users on the emotions behind the click by really drilling down again and again the types of lures that they can anticipate and what that means in terms of protecting your specific organization. So these are some examples of successful campaigns that have hit companies over the years. The first one is an image of a St. Jude site that literally the threat actor swiped the logo, the layout, everything that St. Jude actually had on their website and created a brand new website and basically spoofed the whole thing. In this case, when the user would submit their username here and their password here and then click sign in, the threat actor would then harvest the credentials and kind of pivot and exploit them using AOL. I share this one in particular. I know it's a very tough one to see, but I wanted to just really hit home on the fact that fraudsters do not care. Nothing is off limits, not even cancer. And copyright infringement is not something that they care about because they're, very happy to swipe a logo and make it look very trustworthy. So in our financial services firm, we see lures hitting our representatives a lot of time with logos like Amazon or FedEx, DHL, UPS. And so when we recreate our lures and our simulations, we try to replicate that by also having those same types of trustworthy senders. So folks start realizing that they need to think twice before they click. Another example, and this one is more fear and sense of urgency based. This one I would say hope. So this one looks to be from the help desk, and it says your email account has been compromised and please click on this. And what we're urging our users to do is spend just 10 to 30 seconds of their day per email thinking critically and thinking, if my email account had actually been compromised, why would they send me an email to that same email address? Like, why wouldn't they send me a ping via Slack or call me at my work desk? And just getting folks to think before they click. The other one is that sense of greed or self-interest. So earn an additional, $1,000 per week. Like who wouldn't want to do that? And they're asking to call this number. So this goes to the fact that the threat landscape is evolving, and we are starting to see a lot more cases where there are no links to click. There's actually a phone number that you can engage with and you can call a number, or it can even be an open-ended email that just says, Hey, I'll throw out Chris's name because I see her in the audience. Hey, Chris, just checking in with you to see if you're in today. Had a quick question. And then if Chris is, very friendly and customer service oriented, she might respond like, yeah, I am checking my email. How can I help you? And then there you go. The fraudster is excited because they realize, okay, this email account is active, it's being monitored, and the recipient is willing to engage. And that's when they start the actual phishing lure and attack, because they've basically already gotten you reeled in, so to say. So really spending that time to educate your users on all of these different types of lures that can happen. Going with the same hope-based one, the Stand with Ukraine lure is something we saw a lot of back in February and March when the war really first started. And I'll get into that in a second. So onto the social media phishing here. This is just an example of Warren Buffett, but what I want you to do is really picture an executive from your establishment there, because what a lot of fraudsters and threat actors are doing is replicating your executive social media presence and then using their trusted name and reputation to attack victims, innocent users who sometimes could even be banking with um, a financial services firm, for example, if it happens to be that, or it could be even an employee for your establishment. So let's say you are part of a company that has franchise owners, and a franchise owner in the field gets a text message from somebody purporting to be in the C-suite from the corporate headquarters. A lot of times, if they haven't been educated of a place that they can, one, report. So if they see something suspicious, they have to know where can they say something is suspicious and where can they report it to. If they don't have that, or even that sense of awareness that, hey, this is probably not actually the executive reaching out to me on my cell phone, then they may be inclined to engage because they get so excited that, oh my goodness, this executive from the corporate office is reaching out to me. So you want to be thinking about that. And if you're part of, let's say, a banking institution with brick and mortar banks, so again, you want to be thinking about folks at that operational level receiving a text purporting to be from an executive. The other thing too is not just the text, but any kind of DM, let's say on Twitter or Facebook or Instagram, that looks to be coming from the executive. These are all successfully hit lures that I've seen with financial services firms that I've been a part of, and I know are very much on the rise, and the level of sophistication is just increasing. So really be mindful of those. Now, in terms of email metrics, I blurred out and kind of got rid of specific numbers since this call is being recorded and shared out. But what I want to really convey here is the importance of educating key stakeholders on email metrics, because what you want to do is convey that message of the shark versus the mosquito. And in this instance, so we're looking at a sample quarter in this year at Northwestern Mutual, we observed a total of so many million inbound emails, and of that, we caught so many emails by our automated security filters. So you can see with the donut chart here that the bulk of the email that we received were caught by security filters, but there were a significant number of emails that actually did make it to our inbox. And so sharing these kinds of metrics with actual numbers to key stakeholders in your enterprise will allow for your users to understand that, yes, the company's doing everything they can to automate a lot of these security filters, but there is a certain level of onus on the user, and that security is everyone's responsibility, because ultimately, when millions of emails are reaching our inboxes, the onus does become on us, right? To to champion security, think before we click, and realize that we can really be that change agent by not engaging with a phishing lure. So once you've done that, and once you've educated key stakeholders on those kinds of email metrics and really conveyed the importance of that human defense layer, people are going to need to know where can they report suspicious email, and you're going to need to have a process in place for that. So what we've done at Northwestern Mutual over the last year is we engaged with a vendor And we already had a button in our Outlook ribbon where people could report phishes. But now we've taken it, it's kind of a version 2.0 where we've given a makeover of the button. So whereas before we had an envelope and a hook, we now have an actual fish, which allows users in a subconscious level or subliminal messaging sort of way to understand that when they see the fish, that's where they can go to report the fish, right? And another thing that we've done, aside from actually creating this new user interface, the new user experience that we have is that when people report within an hour, that's our SLA, people get a response where they're thanked for reporting, and then they're giving a diagnostic response of, well, what you reported is a real life threat. So thank you very much for reporting. And this is just a very small screen grab of what they see, but in fact, there's a larger um, blurb that goes in there about, what does this mean and which teams are involved in the whole nine. So a lot of collaboration here to get this whole effort going. And then this campaign of when in doubt, click the trout is what we came up with, which I'll touch on a bit more later. But the point is that the email metrics can't just be shared, that there actually needs to be ways that folks can engage with suspicious email if and when they find it in their inbox. So in our case, what I want to share is are these metrics this is from August of this year, so it's very, very recent. Social engineering is by far the top threat actor technique. And once we got in place this button and this user experience, we had a huge win within days. Okay, so we launched this button in late August, early September, and then within 48 hours of this this button launching here, I don't know if you can see this, a bit fine print, but I'll tell you, a user in our field office found an email requesting for a $45,000 wire transfer. And the email looked to be from a client that they were working with daily. And this client had millions of dollars in their portfolio. So it wasn't a huge ask, but something about this didn't sit well with the financial representative, so they reported suspicious. Within minutes, and I mean within 10 minutes, they got a response saying, hey, this was a business email compromise. Thank you for reporting it. This is a real life threat. Immediately engage with our threat detection and response team. And between the financial representative in the field and our threat detection and response team, which is kind of like your SOC, if you will, they were able to get a hold of the customer, let the client know, hey, your email account's been compromised. I'm getting requests to wire $45,000 from your account. The client had no idea their email had been compromised. They were instructed to then change their password. It was an incredible end-to-end user experience that involved a completely different level of education and training and awareness than we were ever able to do before this new user experience. So I would highly suggest that you be looking at what are the threats hitting your company, and then make sure that you're aligning your processes with that. So going one step further here with our cyber threat intel, we work very closely with our cyber threat intelligence group, and we know from them and also from the platform that we all share that oftentimes these are the folks that are targeted, and these are the types of lures that they're targeted with, and with real attacks. So tax invoice requests or messages pending, and this is one that again speaks to the fact that fraudsters don't care about copyright infringement. They basically swiped the entire format of an Outlook page, and this was a real life attack that we saw hit our C-suite in August. And if folks were to submit their username and password in this, then we'd be in big trouble. And thankfully, they know better, so nobody engaged. But one really interesting thing here is not even just the cyber threat intel piece and integrating those into your lures so that your users become better informed and can think more critically before they engage. But it's really, so these are your targeted leaders, but who's actually um, overseeing their inbox and who's actually handling their email. And 9 times out of 10, that's going to be your executive administrative assistants. So, what we've done at NM is we've actually done a lot of targeted training with our EAs, and gotten them to understand that they really are the backbone of our entire enterprise, because they ultimately are the ones fielding all of the email requests for our executives, overseeing their entire calendar and scheduling, and oftentimes even their invoices. So they are definitely a population that you want to train and not overlook. And that's just one sample of a group that you could target train. And of course, in your enterprise, there's going to be, other roles or departments that will stick out to you. But here I have an example of one of our EAs that supports one of our most visible executives in the C-suite. And again, because this call is being recorded, I've blurred out her face here. But this is an example of her Instagram handle, which is actually very secure. It's very private. You can't access anything. And her digital footprint is actually quite nominal. But what I wanted her to understand was that just with this one picture alone, that only has her name affiliated with it, which folks, threat actors and fraudsters can realize is the EA to this particular leader just by looking on LinkedIn, which is the #1 platform for reconnaissance for fraudsters. They can make those connections and try to target this EA by sending this type of allure, because they see the Ukrainian flag. They can make the safe assumption that she is going to support something like a cause that's pro-Ukraine. And so this was an actual phishing attack that hit many institutions in late February, early March, when the war first broke out. And this is the type that hits the emotion of hope. So let's say she was to receive this and she wanted to provide hope to these, to these victims in Ukraine. She might just click on that donate button and then end up submitting her credentials somewhere. And of course, I think our EAs are really great and they're very well educated on this, and they've done an amazing job protecting our firm. So that wasn't a huge concern, but making them aware is definitely necessary. And I would highly urge you to do the same at your organization. The thing is, though, the topic of cybersecurity and phishing in particular is not the happiest of topics. And over the last 2 years, particularly with COVID and then the war and now monkeypox, it just feels like we are being inundated with really exhausting, energy depleting news that's borderline depressive, right? And what I would really urge you to do is, if you happen to have a fear-based training and awareness program that's like, oh, if you don't do this, we're going to be in big trouble, or, it's just very frightening, I would suggest you really think about rebranding. So something that we've done at Northwestern Mutual over the last year is rebranding, and thought of, consciously made the effort of actually having a logo and a slogan and everything. So when you see all of these different brand logos like Instagram or Nike, McDonald's, you may have, different emotional reactions that are triggered. I know whenever I see McDonald's, I think of really fond childhood memories of road trips with my parents and my sister, where that was the only time we were ever allowed McDonald's, and we would just lose our minds with excitement. When you see the Nike slogan, there are so many memorable Nike ads that come to your mind immediately that trigger a certain reaction. If you see Starbucks, you may even think of an aroma that comes to mind, with like a pumpkin spice latte or something. And so what you really want to do is think of triggering those very positive emotions in the process of building out your security education and training program. So previously I shared the slide that had the image of the fish and then the slogan, when in doubt, click the trout. That's a campaign that we're running this quarter. And each quarter we will be changing the campaign, and the slogan may or may the logo of the fish may or may not remain. But it is such a happy looking fish and such a happy looking logo. And our team has done an incredible job running with that and giving personality to this, flounder, which is basically our team mascot, and making it accessible to users. One thing I will say when considering things like marketing and the execution of rolling out a button like that in your Outlook is timelines. So really be thinking about timelines before you think of execution, because your thoughts, this is kind of like one of those memes that are, Instagram versus reality. Your thoughts may be like mine, where I was like, okay, the business needs it. Let's execute this and let's run. But the reality is there are so many dependencies. You have to first create a business case, and then you have to think about budget. You have to factor in risks that will maybe be impediments to your plan, or risks that you're potentially trying to mitigate when creating the business case. You have to think about vendor management if you decide to go with a vendor, and kind of the third party risk assessments. You have to make sure that your engineering team has the bandwidth and can provide resources to implement anything on the back end. You want to be thinking, of course, of the marketing plan as a whole to figure out, okay, how can we get this message across? You have to collaborate with strategic communications to get the message out. And then, of course, training and awareness piece comes in, where you're actually having to train users on how to use some of these things. So some sample parts of our kind of engaging campaigns here. This Flounder the Trout, we use Slack as our intranet sort of real-time communication platform. And there are very active channels within Slack. One is Pets of NM. And so this would just be a sample post of something that I would post on that Slack channel, with just a very simple, when in doubt, click the trout type of call to action. And then a funny caption that would make it relevant to this channel. And this one is so Spot the Fish. It was a scavenger hunt. This was a lure that actually hit our field office. And so we created this two-part campaign, where on the first week, we published this in the newsletter, and we asked for users to submit what they thought were the red flags of this fish. And then the second week, we revealed what those red flags were, and we mailed off some swag to folks who participated in that contest. So you want to be able to create very engaging campaigns and really leverage marketing methodologies to be able to spread the word. Caption this. If you're a reader of the New Yorker, you know that at the end of each magazine, there's usually like an empty cartoon that users or readers can submit a caption to. You can run a Caption This contest, where folks have to submit a caption that's relevant to some cybersecurity best practice that you're trying to push out to the enterprise. And then you get user generated content, which creates a lot more engagement, because then it's not just you and your security education training team in an echo chamber. If you happen to have summer interns that come, I highly suggest you use this, but with memes, so that the interns can get really involved with captioning memes, and they will run with the program like you wouldn't believe. Okay, so what all this results in are phishing metrics. So again, because this call is being recorded, I didn't want to share specifics of what we are actually seeing at Northwestern Mutual. But what I will share is that, this time, well, not so much this time, but early last year, Q1, Q2, Q3, we didn't really have a regular cadence. We did phishing sims throughout the year, but they weren't as regular as we have it now, which is monthly. We had lures that were sometimes cyber threat intel based, sometimes not, but they were a little bit inconsistent to the training that we were also providing. So I can recall one very uncomfortable one-on-one conversation I had with a repeat clicker. And that's part of our escalation program, is I have to meet with folks one-on-one that have clicked on one too many lures. And I remember a senior director in the learning and development space that had clicked on 7 lures that year. And so I had to meet with her for 30 minutes. And she said, you know what? I've been clicking on lures lately because I'm just so sick and tired of your team's inaccurate training. And she said she didn't like that we were training on things like spelling and grammatical issues when our lures were so much more sophisticated than that. And, we really took to heart what she said. And our team does an incredible job of really doing the research, thinking of the cyber intelligence that they receive from both with our vendors and with our internal teams, and then crafting out lures that are highly relevant to the threat landscape, but then also conducting very stackable training that goes way beyond the sort of basic, look out for spelling and grammatical issues. So as a result of us now having this monthly phishing simulation cadence, which is much more regular, and having all threat intel based lures and having that stackable training, our numbers have improved so much. Whereas before we were tinkering between 15 to 30% of a click rate at any given month, we now are at about a 10% click rate. And that speaks volumes, right, to not only us as a team and makes us feel good, but it also means a lot when our CISO meets with the board and she's able to report positive changes. And all of this also, I want to really add this and give kudos to our team. They've not once compromised the integrity of the phishing lures. So I've heard of businesses where in order to improve the phishing numbers, they'll actually just change the complexity of the lures and make them easier. And that's something that the team and we are all vehemently opposed to. We do not want to make the lures easier just so that our numbers will get better. And so I want to just state that very clearly in case there was any doubt or question around that. One of the ways that we've done that, aside from the campaigning and this new button, is a scorecard that we've released that goes out to the entire corporate enterprise, and next year we plan to launch within the field. But this scorecard is wonderful, and this is just a really small snippet of that, but it's actually a bit more involved and has like 5 different tabs. But what it does is it gives each user an individual security performance score, an overall performance score that's calculated based on whether or not they're passing the simulations, which means they're not clicking, whether or not they're reporting that suspicious email, so the simulations, if they're reporting them or not, and then whether or not they're completing their training that we assign. So using these 3 elements, and the pass rate is at a 50% weight, the report rate is at a 30% weight, and the training is at a 20% weight. So all of these three things weighted comprised of one's overall performance score, excuse me. And users receiving this scorecard, you can imagine, has made them much more aware of, one, the fact that we are tracking these simulations, that we are we have a certain expectation that they report them, and the fact that their leaders are able to get some insight into whether or not they're completing their training. It has made our enterprise so much more aware and educated in terms of the impact of them not engaging in the type of behavioral expectations that we have. And in order to do this, we had to work very closely with an entire team that specializes in Power BI and creating these types of reports using elements of behavioral change to build something like that out. So I'm starting to wrap up here a bit, but what I want to really emphasize is that collaboration is truly key. And if you are able to get buy-in from the top down, so from your CISO on down, into the importance of the human defense layer and kind of investing in this space, you will get so much of a positive change in your space. I can't even emphasize enough the importance of this collaboration piece, because yes, it's true that our phishing numbers are great, but that's not something we've done in a silo. We really have worked very closely with many of the more technical teams on the cyber defense side to be able to make this happen. And I really want to emphasize that working with all of these different teams will not only improve your phishing metrics, but it also helps you as a cybersecurity professional to stay really well informed of what's happening in the threat landscape. So we've done things like a cyber escape room. We've conducted surveys and focus groups after each iteration of that scorecard, and then taken our findings and reported those up to our leaders. So there's just a lot of collaboration that happens daily, and in that process, if you're able to maintain really good relationships and good ties with all of these different teams that would normally otherwise not think of the team that handles the phishing simulations or the education, we end up getting looped in on conversations in real time, and it makes all the difference when we're trying to build out our lures. So lastly, some tips and tricks to improve your phishing metrics, and this is just kind of a recap of everything that I've already said, is to conduct social engineering 101 trainings with all of your executive administrative assistants. Really try to push for that. It is a really effective way to get buy-in from senior leaders, and it's also just a great way to establish like security advocates across all of your business units. Because, for example, when we conducted our social engineering 101 training, there were about 45 executive administrative assistants on that call. Those 45 folks work to support our senior most executives. And if they are thinking of security awareness and education top of the mind, guess who they have, the ear of? These senior leaders that will ultimately be there, to be our greatest advocates. And it's, strategically speaking, it's a great decision to do that, but it also will really help protect your firm. And it's not just the EAs, but you want to be thinking, what are the other roles and departments that you want to target in that manner? The second thing here is to flip the traditional phishing click rates to phishing pass rates. So I'll be honest, I was not a huge fan of this when we first started this, because it's just not the norm in any industry. But I do think it's done something to boost morale. It's the same exact metric, but just flipped from a more positive perspective. And it's easier when you're trying to convey what the metric is to a level like the board, where they're so accustomed to seeing graphs on that 100% scale, than if you're showing up with like 10% click and everything else is 100% completion. You just spend a little bit less time having to explain what that graph is about. The other thing is, and this is something we've just started doing very recently, which is flip your fishes. Take a real life attack that has hit your enterprise, and then create a lure based on that real life attack for your next monthly simulation. And it's a great way to be able to educate people of something that they can actually anticipate may hit their inbox. Conduct phishing simulations with relevant lures, again, as determined by threat intel, and increase the cadence of those simulations, ideally to monthly. It offers a lot more, steady metrics. And this is something that I'm also learning. Before I thought it was going to cause phishing fatigue, and I worried that it would have um, the opposite effect, when in fact it's actually been very beneficial. Get your families involved. Host functions for employees so that they can learn how they can protect their homes, their loved ones. And the sooner phishing and just cybersecurity as a whole becomes a household topic, the more efficient and effective your education and training will be. I haven't done this yet at Northwestern Mutual, but I've done this at a different organization that I was with before, where I actually hosted a day-long event for the spouses of the partners of those in the C-suite. And it was really, really wonderful to have those connections built with them, because then when they went home at the dinner table, they were talking about security education, awareness, and training. And not only did we feel really good about doing our part to help our executives and their home life, being protected, but it was a really wonderful way to really become a household topic which obviously does trickle down in the workplace as well. So where we currently sit, and this is the very last slide here, thank you very much for staying with me. If you were to look at the security awareness maturity model, and this is from SANS, so this is a very well-known model. You can start off non-existent, you can go to compliance focused, you can begin promoting awareness and getting to that behavioral change. But ultimately, what you really want is long-term sustainment and cultural change, and of course, a very metrics-based framework. And where we sit right now at Northwestern Mutual, I would say, is this middle ground. Even though we have metrics and we report them, we aren't we're not yet to that place of maturity where we are able to predict metrics as well as I know we can in the future. So this is kind of our long-term plan of where we're headed. And I have a feeling, by the end of 2023, I will comfortably be able to say, that we are very well in this last framework here. And I think thanks to the support of our leadership and also just the great collaboration, we've kind of been moving at rapid pace. So for example, that button that we have in Outlook, it took us end to end a total of 8.5 months to execute. I've been in a financial services institution before where it took us 4 years to roll out the same button. So just keeping in mind the pace with which our leaders are working and the expectations that they have for all of us, I have a feeling that we'll get where we need to very, very soon. I'd like to open it up for any questions or comments, concerns, if anybody has any.
First of all, thank you so much, Ro. That's a lot of information. I've actually been lucky enough to see this presentation before, and this is phenomenal to see because it's cool to see even, after that, sort of the changes that have been made and the additions that have happened. And it's really, really cool to see the journey that you're on. A brief reminder to folks, if you have questions, if you can pop them in the chat, that would be great. And then we can go forward from there.
Thanks, Megan.
And I can start with my own question. So with the phishing the phishing pass rates, have you thought a lot about other metrics you'd like to collect around phishing, or things sort of like, I know this is kind of specific, but I always think metrics are really interesting. Are we really improving if we can't measure it?
Yeah, so one thing we've done, and I think Lily's on the call. She's done a great job with this. Lily's one of our resident phishing SMEs and experts, is looking at the phishing onboarding metrics and really doing a lot with that. So we send out a lure to folks that are brand new to the company right away to kind of gauge where they sit in terms of click rates. So we know what we have to educate on, and that's something that we now have a huge priority on. And on top of that, there's also the repeat clicker escalation program, and just paying attention to the metrics of how many folks are still clicking after receiving so many trainings, and we're trying to mature and flesh those out. I see two hands. I'm so sorry, I don't know that you're able to ask the question, but I see two attendees, Tracy
Viola,
and Stacy.
Yeah, sorry, I'm realizing I think we have an issue. Viola, I think we have some issues with the chat. Is there any way you can unmute people or chat? Otherwise, maybe we can pass off Ro's contact information, a brief ping. Ro, where would you, if people have questions after this and we're unable to sort out some of these brief technical issues, what's the best way to reach out to you? Do you feel comfortable having folks reach out to you on LinkedIn, or is there a Twitter account?
Yeah, you're welcome to find me on LinkedIn. It's just my name, Roshani Adhikary. So yeah.
This is Tracy. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
The chat is disabled, at least on my end. So that's why I raised my hand to let you know that I don't know if no one can access it, or.
Yeah, I'm sorry about that.
Raises their hand that we can enable them to speak, Megan.
Yeah, so I think if you have any questions, if you have the ability to just press the raise hand button, then Viola here can unmute you and you want to ask a question that way.
That's fine. And let me just add in, Ro, this was a great presentation.
Thank you.
I'm actually on the Northwestern Mutual website looking to see what opportunities are available right now.
That's wonderful. Well, thank you. You can also Slack me if you're internal. You can always send me a DM via Slack. Jessica.
Hi, Ro. This is this is Jessica. Thanks so much. This was a really great presentation. I actually had two questions. I don't know if we have time for both, but one thing that stood out that you said was that the CISO briefed kind of the metrics to the board. Is that, I'm kind of surprised at that level of executive engagement. Is that like a choice that Northwestern Mutual made to like make the board aware, or was it from the board's request? Like,
It's twofold, and that's a great question. So if you should follow our CISO on LinkedIn if you're not already. Her name is Laura Diener, but I'm a diehard fan. She is unlike any CISO I've ever met, and her level of just granular knowledge of our space is unprecedented. I've never met somebody who's this dialed in to our metrics and has pushed this much to get a spotlight on phishing metrics. But so she definitely made a conscious effort to present to the board. And then on the flip side, there is one board member in particular that has asked for a huge focus on what we're calling transform security culture. And there's a 5-year roadmap that involves us truly transforming security culture at Northwestern Mutual. And so it's really a two-way stream, but I would really, I'm impartial obviously to our CISO, and I really attribute that to her clear communication and her ability to make the case for why it should matter.
That's awesome. Second question I had was, I've heard like two extremes on sort of the phishing issue. One being that like repeat clickers, that it's almost grounds for dismissal, like having that extreme of a view because they're putting the enterprise at risk. And the other one being that like you shouldn't be able to have a serious incident from somebody clicking on an email. I have a feeling that the right answer is somewhere in between. What are your thoughts on that in regards to like how do you keep the enterprise safe as well as people are going to make mistakes?
Yeah, I mean, I've been employed at enterprises before where termination was the ultimate consequence. Culturally at Northwestern Mutual, that's not really a viable option right now. We've been around for 165 years. It's a Midwestern-based company with a secondary headquarters in New York and presence there. But it's not a company that's traditionally done layoffs. Even the recession throughout 2008, people held on to their jobs, and it wasn't until I think 2018 that the first layoff ever was conducted. So it's not really like a termination would be aligned with the culture of the company. So in that regards, I don't think that that's an option yet. I will say we are very much looking at the consequences right now and reevaluating what we currently have, which I frankly don't think is enough. But I don't think it should be that extreme either. I think something as simple as an SSO block where a person gets a timeout of their single sign-on and they literally can't log into their systems for 90 minutes or something, that would cause enough of a disruption to get people thinking before they click. So we're working towards establishing those types of consequences.
That's a great idea. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
Awesome. Thank you, Ro. With that, I think we're about at time. I want to be super respectful. So I know it went very fast. So thank you so much for everyone who attended today. Thanks for the questions. Sorry we didn't have time to get to more of them. That is, you said you can reach out to Ro via LinkedIn or email if she's comfortable sharing that. And thank you again for attending a WeSees New York webinar. If you have any questions for us, you can reach out to us via our WeSees NY Metro social media accounts, or you can email myself or find me on LinkedIn. So thank you so much. And thank you. With that, I'll conclude the webinar. Thank you, Ro.
Thank you.